Cool. Right. Hey, everyone. My name is Jitesh Gosai, and I am a principal tester from the BBC, and I work in the iPlayer and Sounds department. Now, for those who don't know, iPlayer and Sounds is the BBC's audio and video on demand services. So essentially, we've got products across all the major platforms, so web, TV, mobile, and the odd smart speaker here and there as well. My role in the department is quite different in that I'm not embedded in any one given team. I'm actually across the whole department. And so I get to see lots of different things within all these different platform teams. And one of the things I keep coming across is this idea of the test column and the kind of interesting problems that it causes. And so today, what I'd like to talk to you about is how I can go about creating, faster delivering teams by killing the test column. So where does this talk actually come from? Well, back in about 2018, a colleague of mine approached me and wondered if I had any articles or blog posts or books or anything really on why I've always advocated for not having an in-test column. And I thought there must be plenty of written on this out there. So I thought I'll have a look around and I'll get back to you. Maybe my Google feels off that day or something, I don't know. But I just couldn't find anything. So I thought, well, it's probably easy for me to just write something than wasting more time looking for it. So I quickly knocked together a quick blog post and I sent it to him. And he was very grateful, and that was the end of that. I thought I'll go into the effort of writing this. I might as well share it around a bit. So I stuck it up on Twitter and a few other places and kind of forgot about it. A couple of weeks later, I came back, and it turned out to be one of the most popular blog posts I'd ever written. I didn't go viral or anything, but quite a few people were reading it, and you kind of see it, one person clicking, and then all of a sudden 10 other people starting to click very quickly. So it's like, okay, it looks like I might have hit on something here. So today, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about how we actually go about moving away from the test column, because this blog post only really talked about what the problems actually are. So first of all, for those who don't know, what's a board? This is a typical whiteboard. And for those that when we were back in the office and we had physical spaces and all the things were nice and easy, this could be a typical board where the team would visualize how they work. And each of these kind of post-it notes that you can see in this image are kind of tasks that team would do. And obviously now we're a much more digital environment now, all working remotely or in some sort of form of hybrid. So these more digital boards are coming a lot more favorable nowadays. So Trello being one, and everybody's favorite, Jira, which also has one as well. And I've also seen a few teams using Miro to recreate those whiteboards that they used to have, but obviously in the digital space. So this is what I mean when I talk about boards, essentially Kanban boards, or a way for the team to visualize their work. But what do I mean when I say teams? Well, in terms of teams, I'm talking about development teams. And typically you may have, 4 developers, probably a tester, and then you'll have your delivery folk as well. So maybe project managers or delivery managers, depending on what you like to call them, product owners or product managers, again, depending on what you like to call them, and maybe some UX or design people. Now, your teams may not look exactly like this. Maybe they're bigger, maybe they're smaller, maybe there's a different makeup of people in there. But you kind of get the idea of what I mean by development teams. And typically, what does this team do? Well, they generally go through some sort of discovery phase, essentially trying to figure out, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And what problems are we trying to solve? And what solutions could be used to solve those problems? They may then get that with their delivery team, who may chop that up into actual tasks for the team to actually work on. And that goes into like a to-do column or a backlog, perhaps. Developers will eventually pick off tasks from this column and start working on it in the in-dev column. Once they're done, the tester will pick it up and they'll do their magic. And that's typically in the oh, damn it. Oh, sorry about that. It's like my clicker's gone on the blink. And your testers will typically pick that up and they'll do their work in the in-test column. And then from there, what you tend to find is developers can get through more work than testers. So they tend to back that work up in the waiting for test column. But eventually the testers will be done, they'll push that into done, and then your delivery folk will get involved again and hopefully release that into the wild. And that is a typical team board. Now, again, a lot of your teams may not have boards that look like this, but you get a kind of an idea with the traveler work going from left to right and how it kind of helps the team visualize what they're working on and how they're doing it. So that's what I mean when I talk about team boards. So what problems does this in-test column actually cause? Well, typically what you see is the testers work in the in-test column and they'll pick up work for waiting for tests, work on it in the test column, and then push it into done. The developers work in the in-dev column, picking up work from to do, pushing it into waiting for test, and then your delivery folk kind of working in the to do and release columns. And what you find is that this kind of encourages inner team silos. The testers stay in their little column, the developers stay in theirs, and the delivery folk kind of on the periphery. And what people tend to do is that becomes their safe space, and that's where they tend to focus a lot of their efforts. Another problem you tend to see is the developers pick up their work, they push it into waiting for test, tester comes along, picks up the work, but the developers don't sit around waiting for the testers to finish and give them feedback. They'll pick up the next ticket and start working while the testers are working on the previous piece of work. So what that does is it slows down the feedback for the developers. This essentially encourages pushing testing towards the end of the delivery pipeline and slowing down that feedback loop and causing all numerous problems for the development team when they get bugs back and work moving backwards through the process. Another problem you tend to see as well is developers pick up work, push it into waiting for tests, testers eventually pick it up and push it into done. And what this encourages is more work in progress for the team. And essentially what you see is the team get used to starting more work than they actually get used to finishing work. And typically, two of these columns are literally just queues waiting for someone to actually do something with it, essentially become holding grounds. And work is actually only happening in two of the columns, the in dev and testing. So essentially, a third of your board is actually for physical work. Everything else is literally just a holding ground, just visualizing where work's up to, but not actually doing anything. And as I mentioned earlier, there's always more developers than there are testers and teams. So they tend to be able to get through a lot more work, which then piles up in the waiting for test. And then your tester eventually gets around to picking that work up and start working on it, which essentially causes a bottleneck in that process. And so what you tend to see is testing becomes the team's biggest constraint in getting value out the door, as that's the bit of the process which always slows down in most teams, especially when they only have one person to actually do this work. So what do? Well, in some teams, what they go with is, let's just add more testers, and they'll do this in numerous different ways. For instance, they'll ask their existing tester, can you work a bit overtime? Can you come in the morning a bit earlier, maybe stay a bit later, come in on the weekend? And that works at first. That works at first, but that works at first. Sorry, I'm due tech issues. But eventually, that's going to tire them out, and they're going to burn out. You could hire more testers if you're lucky, which does work, but they'll eventually pick up all that slack, and then you'll have excess testers around. For most teams, they can't actually hire more testers, so maybe they can borrow some from somewhere else, but you're still going to end up in the same problem again. And the other typical solution, which was very popular a little while back, which is outsource it. Let's just send that work away. Why even bother with having testers on site? We can just get someone else to do it. All they're doing is smashing buttons, right? And that caused other problems, such as the team not actually fully understanding what testing is happening, how it's happening, and actually further slowing down that feedback loop as well. So a more typical solution that a lot of teams have employed nowadays is, well, let's just automate it, right? All they're doing is like hitting buttons. Why not just get a machine to do that? And that typically works. They tend to focus on the UI testing here, and it helps at first, but eventually those tests get slower, it get clunkier. Your tester, who typically has to pick up this automation, is now trying to do exploratory testing as well as this automated testing, and eventually you still got the same problems as before, where the inner team silos, well, they haven't gone, they're still right there. You're still pushing testing towards the end of the process, and you might even have even more work in progress now. So you haven't really solved very many of those problems. Essentially just deferred it ever so slightly, and they eventually come back. So what do? Well, one option is just get rid of the columns. Nothing's going to be siloed anymore because there's only one place where you can work. There's no bottleneck anymore. Again, there's only one place where you can work. And work in progress, well, that's come right down now because you can only put work in that people can actually pick up. And work can only go in one of two ways, either to do or to release. So that solves all those problems, right? Well, kind of. What you tend to find is that a lot of teams actually kind of prefer this way of working. For them, it's really safe. As a tester, I got my test column. I can see the value I bring. Someone else can see the value I bring. And I know where to get work from. I just pick it up from this column and I push it on to the next. Same for the developers. They've got their column. They know where work's coming from and they know where it needs to go. And it kind of looks efficient and productive for these individuals. But not only that, gets rid of all that pesky collaborating you need to do. I don't need to talk to anyone. I don't need to ask anyone. I can just see where the next load of work is and what I need to be doing next. So if you were to simply delete this, the likelihood is you're just going to push that work underground, and you're just going to be left with an in progress column with all those problems still happening, but no way to actually visualize it. So one of the things you could do is actually approach this incrementally by applying something known as a theory of constraints. So what exactly is this? So this was an idea from a book called The Goal by Elihu M. Goldratt. It was released in the 80s. And it was actually a bit different to your typical business books in that it was actually a story, a novel, in fact. And it explained the story of this manufacturing plant that was not doing so well and how they applied this theory of constraints to resolve their problems in manufacturing. And essentially, the idea is to find the biggest constraint of your department or team or organization getting value out. And they do this via 5 focusing steps of theory of constraints, or TOC, as some people like to call it. So what are these steps? 1 is identify the system's constraint. 2, decide how to exploit the system's constraint. 3, subordinate everything else to the above decision. 4, alleviate that system's constraint. And 5, do not allow inertia to cause a system constraint. So they seem pretty straightforward, but how you actually use these is quite interesting. So, and the other interesting aspect of this was taken from a manufacturing background, but it actually kind of applies to software engineering really well in this case as well. So let me walk you through an example and show you how this would actually work. So first of all, identify your system's constraint. What you want to do here is start taking averages. How long does it take for work to get through your board? And you want to get those averages. Now, in this case, what you can see is, on average, development is taking about 3 days. Now, you could tackle this area first, but what you'll find is, even if you got this number down, which is probably unlikely because you got to do some work, right? It's still going to be bottlenecked by all these other processes in front of it. So that might not be the best one to tackle. The next one on the list is the done column, which is on average taking 1.7 days. Now, if you tackle this and got this down to, let's say, half a day or even a couple of hours, you'd immediately see an improvement. The other 2 is the wait for test column, which is on average taking a day, and your in test column, which is taking 2 days. And in this case, the total of these 2 combined is 3 days. Now, if you made an improvement here, you'd see a huge improvement in the overall process straight away. And for this example, we're actually going to focus here, but you quite easily go for the done column in this case as well. So priority order is, we're going to have a look at in testing first, then the waiting for test, and then if we have more time, we'll look at the done and in dev columns. So you've identified your system constraint. It's the in testing column in this case. Decide how to exploit the system's constraint. A lot of the work that testers do tends to be hidden behind a testing banner. And so what most people see from testers is essentially bug reports or that everything's fine. They don't really understand fully what testers are doing and how they do it, and how they go about doing their roles. They kind of just lead them to it and go, just let me know if there's any problems. And so we kind of want to change that a bit. And we kind of want to create a team understanding of what testing actually is. And so one of the best ways of doing that is breaking down the work that happens during testing. And you can do that quite easily by taking the last handful of completed tickets and starting to see what the key themes are. Now, you want to do this as a group and identify what those themes are. So in this instance, the tester do regression testing, accessibility testing, smoke testing, feature testing, etc. The different types of testing or key themes out of those tickets will vary from team to team, but you get the idea of what they could be doing. And from that, you want to ask them 2 questions. 1, how do they know to do that type of testing? Like, what is it in the ticket or in the work or in the environment that tells them, oh, this needs regression testing, or that needs smoke testing, or this needs feature testing? And then secondly, how do they know when it's complete? How do they know they've done enough testing? What tells them, yeah, this is good enough, or maybe I need to do some more? Now, what that will give you is the key themes and entry and exit criteria for that type of work to happen. Now, a word of warning here. You want the testers to do this as a group, not by themselves off on the side, which will typically be the way that most teams will try and do this, is that, well, we don't need to disturb everyone. Don't forget, we're trying to open up the testing process and improve everyone's understanding of what testing actually is and how they actually do it. So if the testers go off and do this by themselves, the team actually miss out on the opportunity to learn about what they do and how they do it. But there's another problem as well. By doing this, you kind of put testers under the microscope and kind of put them in the spotlight and almost make them feel like you're checking up on them, like you don't trust what they do or don't trust how they do it. And it's almost as if you're trying to micromanage them. So you want the testers to lead this process, but you want them to do it with the most senior members of the team. By senior, I mean maybe your dev lead, the product managers, or the most respected and experienced members of that team. The reason for that is you want those individuals to let the testers know that they're supporting them. And not by simply just saying, yeah, I've got your back, and then carry on with the day job, but actually sitting down with the testers. What are you doing? How are you doing? How do you plan to run this session? What do you want me to do? How can I help? And really get involved with the testers and let them know that actually, I really care about what you do and how you do it. And not only that, when that session is run, those senior members attend that session. And when inevitably someone asks, why do you do it like that? Or what's the point of that? Or that's duplicated effort, to jump straight in and let the team know that actually, we're not here to question why, we're here to understand what. And if the testers think this is important, then it's important. So let's better understand how they test and the value they bring. And to frame it in a certain way, and frame it in a positive light as well. And that this isn't about eliminating testing, but it's about prioritizing testing. We don't want to get rid of you, we want to do more of it. And one of the best ways we do more of it is by everyone understanding exactly how you work. And because you're the experts in this field, to help us understand what you do and how you do it so we can all get involved. And this will really help the testers to kind of open up rather than going towards the defensive mode of self-protection. And not only that, it shows the rest of the team as well that when it's their turn for this process, they're going to be supported as well. So from there, you want to take those key themes and exit criteria, and you're going to tweak your boards ever slightly. You're going to take your boards and you're going to crack them open a little bit. You're going to take those key themes and you're going to add them as new columns to the board. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That doesn't sound very agile. I mean, I thought we were trying to get rid of the columns. Now we're adding more. Well, the reason for this is we kind of want to visualize the type of work that's happening and where. And doing that on your board is one of the best places. Typically, we tend to look at our boards first thing in the morning and maybe even during the day and in retros and other ceremonies, depending on how you work. So this is one of the best ways of visualizing what's actually happening. Now, I know a lot of teams tend to go, well, can we not put this in a document? Can we not just have a discussion? Can we not just create a second board? I try not to do that if you can, because that's just hiding that work and we go back to the same problem we had before. And so that doesn't encourage that team understanding of what type of testing happens where. So you're able to add this to your board and add those key themes. What you can now do is improve the team's understanding of when that piece of work comes in, they can see exactly when it goes into those different types of testing and how long it actually spends in those columns. Then using that entry and exit criteria, you can start identifying mitigation steps of, well, how could we do this testing differently? Is there any chance we could do it earlier on in the process? And you want to continue calculating those averages. This is a key thing. You need those numbers so you can understand if you're getting better or not. So step 3, subordinate everything else to the above decision. Now, typical tasks, the way teams like to tackle this is, well, the testers know this the best, so why don't we just let them get on with it? That's probably not the best way of doing it. Also, if you can, I know not every team can do this, but stop what you're doing in the team and get the whole team onto this problem. Don't forget, this is the biggest thing that's constraining you getting value out the door. So why not put the whole team on it and put everyone's effort into mitigating this type of testing and allowing it to happen earlier in the process? Now, I know not everyone can do this. So one way of doing this is getting your testers and pairing them up with your developers to kind of figure out how they're going to do that work and turn those mitigation ideas into an experiment, which they can then turn into a task and then run it through the board like everything else. And what this will allow the team to do is keep everyone in the loop of how they're actually working on that task. But if you can, put your whole team onto it. If you can't, set up a small group who then runs that work through the board as an experiment so everyone can understand what's going on. Step 4, alleviate the system constraint. So you got your experiment, you got your team, you know where the constraint is, start working on it, start applying those ideas. And what you'll find is if you're successful, that type of testing will slowly start to come down. And what you'll find is you'll be able to front load that testing much earlier on in the process. So much so that eventually you probably won't even need that column anymore. Tickets won't even need to go in there because you would have done that testing already. And you may be able to push it straight into done. And at that point, you don't need that column, you can just get rid of it. Step 5, Do not allow inertia to cause a system constraint. So once you've alleviated that one column, the things that teams tend to do here is go, brilliant, we've solved that problem, let's go back to work. And that might not be the case. What you really want to do is go back around the process again and start identifying the next key theme that you want to tackle. And maybe even switch up the group that does the work so you can spread that knowledge around the rest of the team and keep calculating those averages. And as you're able to do that testing earlier on in the process, you'll eventually find that some testing you might just be able to automate now, and that might be an ideal candidate for automation. So you can get rid of that. Some testing you might actually be able to combine with other types of testing. So that removes that type of testing. But some testing, you just might not be able to get past a certain threshold. And so you'll still have to continue doing this. And what you'll find is you've actually eliminated even more of that testing and pushed that earlier on into the development process. And so that testing that you can't get past a certain threshold is the testing that still needs to happen. Back to your waiting for test column. Well, that was taken a day before. Likelihood is very little is actually sitting in that waiting for test column now. It's just this exploratory testing in this example that needs the testers in for. And so that might even come down to an hour, and that won't even be for most of those tickets anymore. And so you're now in a position of actually combining this column into one big in progress column. And not only that, you've done this collaboratively. So not only do the testers and the developers understand what type of testing needs to happen where, but you've improved their confidence that actually we can do this testing earlier. And there are other mitigation methods that we can apply to kind of limit these types of risks that we feel that, our work is actually bringing into the process. On top of that, the development team now know when is the best time to use their testers. Like, what kind of work do we need our testers to get involved with? And it might not be every single ticket anymore. It's probably going to be a few key ones where you really want to throw your best people at it. And so the testers and the team can work together to figure out when they use that individual to help them with their work. And so your averages come down and you go back around the process and you identify the next constraint in the process and you start all the process all over again. So to summarize, if you want a collaborative way of tackling your ways of working in your team, then the theory of constraints is one great way of figuring out how to improve your boards. Using those 5 steps, you identify what the system constraint is, simply just measure how long tickets take on average, and that will tell you where the biggest constraint in your process is. Decide how you're going to exploit that constraint by identifying what the entry and exit criteria is and what you could actually do about mitigating that test in this example. Subordinate everything else to the above decision. So you want to put your whole team on it if you can. I know that's not always possible. So you want to split up a small group of people that can keep the rest of the team up to speed, but also run that experiment through the team's board, just like any other process. And the key there is experiment. Alleviate that system constraint. As they start running that task through their board, they start to figure out new ways of doing that type of testing while still delivering value. And do not allow inertia to cause another system constraint. As soon as you solve one, the likelihood is the bottleneck will then move to another part of the process. So you start the process again, figure out where the new bottleneck is, and around the loop you go again. And what this does is gives the team a structured improvement process on how to tackle their way of working, and how to make it better while still actually delivering value. So this gives the team a way of focusing on what is the most important thing that actually slows them down getting value out the door, rather than just tackling any old thing that they think, oh, that's not great, we could fix it. While advantageous, doesn't necessarily mean you've improved your ability to deliver value to your end users. What the theory of constraints does is allows you to figure out where that is. At a team level, this brings all sorts of other behaviors in as well. For instance, it allows the team to start speaking up. And by that, what I mean is sharing what they know and what they don't know, and letting other people understand, this is how I do my role. How do you do yours? It encourages collaboration, especially through experimentation. And so it allows them to tentatively start working together and figuring out, how do you do what you do and how can we actually help each other? And by doing it in experimentation, it means that if they fail, well, then it's not too bad because, hey, it's just an experiment, right? We'll learn from that via reflecting. And then whatever we learn, we'll apply back into the experiment, and around the process we'll go again. And it kind of destigmatizes that idea of failing and getting things wrong, but also enables them to actually more collaboratively work together. It's just an experiment, right? It doesn't matter if it goes wrong. It's what we learn from it that's important. And what this does is it creates the conditions for continuous improvement and allows the team to have a structured way of tackling those problems in their team that almost seem like impossible, but this allows them to figure out how they can go about fixing those problems while still doing some work, or hopefully, if they're allowed to, actually tackling those problems as and when they see. But for this to be successful, then there's a certain culture and ability that the team needs. This won't naturally happen. The team leads, or the most senior members of the team, really need to encourage this type of working. And in particular, they need to establish psychological safety within the team. And by that, it's about speaking up, allowing those individuals to share what they know, but also the harder stuff, things to share, such as what they don't know, mistakes they've made, things they don't agree with, and things they think they could be done differently. And so you need psychological safety, so they have the belief that actually I can say these things and not worry about people judging me or actually losing an opportunity because I went against the grain of the team. They also need to be positively framing the work. If they do it defensively, for instance, if we don't do this, then we'll all lose our roles, or our team will be disbanded, or we won't get our bonuses, or you won't get that promotion, then the likelihood is that's not going to encourage collaboration. That's going to encourage people to protect themselves and focus on inwardly rather than outwardly on the rest of the team. So they need to positively frame it and make it aspirational. For instance, framing the work as not eliminating testing, but prioritizing it helps everyone understand that actually this is really important. We want to do more of it, not that we're actually trying to get rid of it. Working across discipline boundaries and norm as well. As I mentioned earlier, those columns give people a sense of comfort, and those inner team silos are comforting to those individuals. I know where I stand, I know what I'm needed to do, and I've got my value very clearly seen on the board. And so they'll stay within those silos. And so what those team leads need to do is help people work across those discipline boundaries and get them used to sharing what you do and how you do it, and help them understand that it's not about getting rid of you, it's about improving the whole team's way of working so we can better understand the problems you have and how we can actually work together to solve them. And the reason for getting into experimentation is to help the team learn failure. One of the problems we have is we tend to grow up in a world where failing is actually bad. We get told off for failing in school. And so we kind of take this with us when we go into the work environments. The problem is with software engineering, a lot of the processes we follow may not always be successful, and a lot of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve might not be successful. So failure is inherent with our successes. And so we need to get better at learning from failure and helping our team members handle failure and get used to sharing it and going, hey, it's okay, we will get things wrong, we'll learn, and we'll improve together. Now, if you'd like to learn more about what this actually does, is create a learning environment and really helps start setting up that environment for continuous improvement. But this doesn't happen naturally. People need to encourage this way of working. If you'd like to learn more about this, then I highly recommend reading Teaming by Amy Edmondson and her follow-up book, Fearless Organization, which goes into more details about psychological safety, but she does break down all these different aspects in much more detail than I have here today. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. And what I hope this has done is shown that this isn't about eliminating testing at all, but it is about prioritizing testing. It's not about killing or deleting or removing it, but it's about helping the team better understand when it's happening, why it's happening, and how we can get better at doing it. And not only that, theory of constraints is actually a brilliant way of helping teams get towards this utopia of continuous improvement, and helps them identify where their value is being blocked in their processes and actually where they should be really focusing their efforts to get value out faster. And it might not always be the most obvious place in your development process, but just making some small changes might automatically help you get faster and help you deliver more value to your users. So if you'd like to learn any more about some of the things that I've raised today, there are a number of blog posts that could probably help you out. And I highly recommend checking out the books that I mentioned as well. And I think we might have sped us up ever so slightly there. So hopefully we've got about 5 minutes worth of questions before we've got lunch.
Do we have any questions?
Okay, I don't know if you still hear me, but I can't see any questions. So you may need to think them out. Ah, here we go. Okay. Okay, right. Okay. So one of the first questions we've got here is, what would be the best way to communicate this new way of working to a team? Good question. A really interesting way is kind of helping the team understand what's going on with their processes. Like, why are we trying to improve our way of working? And helping them understand what the theory of constraints is actually doing. I mean, I went through it very quickly, but the idea behind theory of constraints is identifying the biggest bottleneck in you getting value out. And so by measuring your development process, you can actually figure out where the biggest constraint is. And so instead of trying to encourage your team to work in a different way, help them identify where the bottlenecks are and tackle those first. And what we tend to find is as they find new ways of improving those bottlenecks, they naturally start to change their ways of working and start to see, well, hold on, wait, it doesn't make sense to work like that anymore. Maybe we should do it like this. And so instead of the focus being on your ways of working, it's about alleviating the constraints to getting value out. So you actually focus on where the problems are, not on your way of working. The way of working will naturally change as you improve that process. So I don't know who asked that, whether that answered their question, but I hope it did. The next question here is, how can you combat resistance to changing this process? Oh, that's a good one. Yes, there's a hell of a lot. The types of issues you tend to hear are testers feeling like you're trying to eliminate them. You know, the moment you get rid of that test column, they're going to feel like, hold on, wait, my value is now being hidden or removed. You know, and even if you tell them, hold on, wait, we're going to be doing testing earlier in the process, it's just that we don't need the column anymore. They'll still feel like you're trying to get rid of them. Not only that, I've heard pushback from developers as well who start going, well, hold on, wait, am I now expected to build code and test it? Isn't that asking me to do even more work than I was doing before? And, you know, will I get a pay rise? You know, you're changing my job spec, which is always an interesting conversation to have. And what I tend to find is when you end up going down the road of changing the ways of working or removing those columns, or what typically happens is that you tend to get more of those problems. So again, I'd go back to the previous point that I made, which is actually focus on where the biggest constraints are and let the team naturally involve their process and let them see for themselves that actually, you know what, this way of working actually isn't working for us. This new way of working might actually work better. And so you're not changing their process, they're changing it. What process do you go through to identify your organization's constraints? Really depends on what level you're talking about. So in this example, I was talking at the team level, you know, the people actually doing the work on a day-to-day basis. And one of the simplest ways is literally measuring work through their process. You know, how long does it take them to get value out? What's their throughput? Now, how often are they releasing? Other areas that you could look at is their change failure rate. How often are they releasing changes in the environment that actually results in failure to their end users? And specifically their end users, not just failures that they themselves identify, but failures that your users think, hold on, wait, this isn't good for me. And then also how quickly are they able to recover from those failures? So once they detect it, how do they detect it? Once they have detected it, how quickly can they fix it? And again, those are some really interesting measures. You can learn even more about those types of measures. So they're the 4 key measures from the Accelerate books and the DevOps reports that have been coming out for the last couple of years, which go into even more details. That's one way. One way is the way I described it, which is literally just measuring things going through your board. How long does it take you to do anything? How long are things sitting in queues? You know, for instance, the waiting for test or the done column if you have a separate release column. And simply just measuring those little things can be one way of figuring out your constraints. Now, if you're talking in a larger organizational view, then that gets a lot more complicated. And I think that's probably a talk in itself. So I'll pass on that bit. Other questions. Which companies have you seen try to make these changes and fail? Where do you think they went wrong? Good question. So I've seen a few companies. The teams I've seen, let me share the example of where it's been successful. Some teams I've seen do this successfully. They've literally looked at it and gone, oh yeah, you're right. Let's just get rid of those columns. And literally they were able to make that change overnight. The key thing with these teams was though, they collaborated really well. The levels of communication in that team were already super high. They already worked really well together. And it was just, they just kept this way of working because, hey, that's just the way they've always done it. And so they all could already speak up. They could already collaborate really well. They could already experiment and reflect. They already had a really good culture of working together. The organizers where I see this fail are the very ones that, okay, I think we're out of time. So thank you very much.